What happened to the climate refugees? Now, this story is from last week. I kept it. It's too good to pass up. 5 years ago, the United Nations predicted there would be 50 million climate refugees by 2010. That's kind of like the Ted Danson prediction in 1988 that if we didn't clean up the oceans in 10 years, that there'd be death and pestilence everywhere. The United Nations 5 years ago predicted that these climate refugees would be fleeing from areas that are in fact now showing some of the largest population increases in the world. In 2005, the United Nations Environment Program predicted that climate change would create 50 million climate refugees by 2010. These people, it was said, would flee a range of disasters, including sea level rise, increases in the numbers and severity of hurricanes, and disruption of food production. The UNEP, which is the United Nations Environment Program, provided a map. So the title of the story here is What Happened to the Climate Refugees? There are 50 million people missing. Meanwhile, far from being places where people are fleeing, no fewer than the top 6 of the very fast-growing cities in China, Shenzhen, Dongguan, Fujian, Zhuhai, Puning, and Xinjiang, are obviously smack bang within the shaded areas identified as being likely sources of climate refugees, but their populations are skyrocketing. So it's another example, a huge story of the environmentalist wackos being entirely wrong. Imagine 50 million climate refugees. And there are none. And there are no sea level increases. John Hamm at the John Locke Foundation, the ozone hole hoax was a global warming warm-up act. If you may not be old enough to remember this, many of you are. Back in the 70s, 80s, we had to get rid of Freon. We had to stop using aerosol spray cans because that was creating the hole in the ozone. Folks, it was the panic over the ozone hole was as big a panic as any of you who remember any panic associated with global warming. I mean, it was big. They had maps. They had charts. They showed us how big the hole was. And it was going to lead to skin cancers. And it was going to lead to global warming. It was going to lead, it was going to be an absolute disaster. And the hole was getting bigger. And they finally found out it was aerosol. So people started making jokes about spraying Right Guard was causing an ozone hole. Now, of course, back then, I, your host, as big a skeptic then as now, and I laughed at it. Are you really trying to tell us, do you really want us to believe that aerosol spray cans are causing a hole in atmospheric ozone? And they were dead serious. The Montreal Protocol to ban freons was the warm-up exercise for the IPCC. They recently measured the ozone hole's the same size, and it fluctuates. It changes in size year to year. If the measurements are correct, we can basically no longer say we understand how ozone holes come into being. But it was the same hoax, the same tactic, the same technique. It was the same. In fact, the New York Times in January of 2010 had a story on the ozone hole is mending. That hole, the Earth's ozone layer, slowly mending, considered a big victory for environmental policymakers. But in a new report, scientists say there's a downside. The repair may contribute to global warming. So a year ago, the hole was reducing, but that was causing global warming. Now, before the ozone hole, it was acid rain. And then it was nuclear winter. And it went from global warming to compact fluorescent light bulbs. I'm telling you, every aspect of it is a lie. Every environmental claim, every one that's apocalyptic, it's a lie. Full-fledged, 100% through and through.